Welcome to segment 2 of Joe and the Fat Man, Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Golick. Kyle, a few episodes ago, we talked about your list that you put on Nittany Sports Now, a 5-part list dealing with the top 25 games of the first 25 years of the 21st century for Penn State. I understood how you did that list. Um, but as far as top 25 players go, this isn't anything on you. If anything, I'm impressed by you because I can compare baseball players and probably basketball, hockey, whoever all day. I have a very hard time comparing football players because every position is just so different. There's different functions. The stats aren't going to line up. I could never do it. How are you able to determine who the 25 best players of the 21st century for Penn State have been so far?
Very good point there, Joe. So the way I approached it is this, when I sat there and I jotted down 40 players that I thought were worthy right off the bat. And so then I began tiering them. You look at performance, you look at, a combination of individual slash team accomplishment. You look at just sheer ability. Obviously there's a little bit of recency. I don't want to say there's a recency bias. That the players that I have where I have them, without a doubt, earned where they're at. Having played the game, and grant you, I'm going to sound like Al Bundy for a moment here. 4 touchdowns, city championship, Polk High against Andrew Johnson High. But the key thing is, when you've played the game, when you have that difference maker at a certain position that just changes the game for you. You look at different how players had to overcome obstacles, that even the internal obstacles that you may have. That's one of the reasons a certain player got to number 5 on my list. I don't think you could make the argument that that was even higher in a lot of regards. So when you have with football, there's a lot of specialization, and I think you can appreciate specialization with baseball. You're starting to see more and more. It's not guy getting 300 touches a year. Look at what's going on with Katron and Nick. They split carries. Does that hurt them against a guy like Larry Johnson who had the full lion's share of reps? You can make the debate on that. But that's what makes this fun. Obviously, you got to kind of first off, I always look at eye test. Having watched football since Penn State football since the early 1990s and covering recruiting and like reading books like Finding the Winning Edge by Bill Walsh and just learning like the history of the game and reading scouting reports and understanding things, you get an idea from an eye test who really just jumps out at you and who's really special. Then you look at like the actual achievements that the accomplishment of things has to mean something in some regard. So you got to take that, but you also got to weigh in like what did they do that's amazing, and that's probably where like the top 2 players on my list gets in. It will probably get some people heated. Some people think I'm an idiot, but when you really think about it, and I'll talk about it here shortly. You there's certain things guys do that you just go, you're like, I can't imagine someone else doing that, and what it takes to be that good, to be able to be that type of difference maker. It's hard, like you look at Saquon Barkley, you look at Nick Singleton, both are dynamic and explosive athletes. There's something with Saquon's resume that has him right now all over Nick. When you put that on the field, that's where the eye test comes in. It's like, while Nick is extremely explosive, Saquon Barkley could be plugged and play at running back. He could run any receiving route tree. He made an impact on special teams. I know Singleton's had a few kicks where he's returned for touchdowns. I know a few of them have been nullified by penalty, but that's where the fun of this happens, Joe. So I'm excited to kind of break this down for the listeners at home and kind of get your thoughts on it and explain maybe why I did certain things as well.
So how much did you weigh like intangibles, like not necessarily stats or even team success? Like how much were those weighed? Because obviously, not to spoil too much, but Michael Mowdy ranked pretty favorably on the list, and a lot of that had to do with the 2012 off season, which Penn State fans all know about.
Intangibles has a matter, but you also got to remember Mowdy put up an amazing 2012 season. So when you do something like here, you got to think of this. That intangible weighed heavy because at the end of the day, you look at where the game is today. It was a precursor to what the transfer portal is. He was actively recruited. I think he even tells the story like LSU was like open invitation. I mean, he's from Louisiana. That's where his dad
Yeah,
Rich.
then Tim Beck with all that stuff.
Oh
So
yeah, the good old Bill O'Brien handshake with him was legendary. But with a guy like Mowdy, it was a combination of an amazing season, the intangible of the pledge, but then the other intangible with it came at the very end of the season when he did suffer another torn ACL, I believe, and everyone wore the number 42. That's never going to happen again. Like that is our like Rudy moment in Penn State history. Like Mowdy is the author of those two moments in my eyes. So um, it weighed significantly. For him that gave him probably towards the top. And in a lot of ways, sometimes when you do these, you have to take into account who are the most important players as well, because there's an aspect of being important that defines greatness as well.
yeah, so I think I'm not going to say where they are, not to spoil too much,
I
but
mean,
I
it's
know
been,
Drew.
I know it's been out for a bit, so
Yeah,
I mean, I feel
but yeah, having Drew Hour and Nick Singleton are on the list. How high do you think they can go? And are there any Penn State players on this current 2025 team that, if you were to run this back next year, could sneak into that top 25?
That is a very good question. So Drew Aller, much like I said in the piece, has every opportunity to be the number one overall player. If he had in here's the thing, and by no stretch of the imagination, I don't want anyone to think when I say, if Drew has a Joe Burrow type season, and I understand that Drew is inflanked by Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase at
And
wide.
Thaddeus Moss.
Yes, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in his backfield. But if Drew, because Drew took that step from his 2023 to 2024 season, he took a big step. If he takes half that, you're in what Will Howard did last season at Ohio State. You're in that Joe Burrow range. If he takes that jump and he's able to have the receiver help and he's able to throw and win some big games and have that statement where he may get invited to New York for the Heisman and clean up some awards, he has a chance to be number one. That's first and foremost. Now, Nick Singleton, I have just inside the top 20 here. He has a legitimate shot at getting the all-time career Penn State rushing record. And he may share that distinction with his backfield mate, Katron Allen. Katron did not make the list. I think he has an opportunity to crack the top 25. But he has to kind of have that, like when you think of the 2005 USC Trojans, we have a Reggie Bush, Lindell White situation going. So Nick has to be essentially like Reggie Bush, where he's this game-breaking, dynamic athlete that could be used in a plethora of ways and is a spark plug. Katron Allen has to have that Lindell White type season where it's, he gets 1,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and he's just in very much powerful situations, get that done. Deni Dennis Sutton is another name I feel that could crack this. He's, it's, much like I mentioned in here, we witnessed what I felt was like the 21st century defensive measuring stick season with Abdul Carter. So that's going to be tough to um, crack. But if he has that opportunity, it's there. And also Zane Durant, it's one of the players that did not make it that I really, really wanted to make it were guys like Anthony Zettel and Jimmy Kennedy to make this list because they were ultimate disruptors in the interior. So them not making it hurts. But Zane Durant is so unique as an athlete. The fact that he didn't get in there. The highest D tackle on my list, I believe, was Jared Odrick, and he's at number
Was
2, was 21. And Odrick had that Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year seasons in, I think, 08, 09 time frame. So when you're looking at that, that's like my measuring stick. And I think Zane Durant is right there with Jared. He doesn't have the accomplishment of things that will get you onto this list, but if you watch the tape and use the eye test, it's really close.
Did he have Audric ahead of Still? Because I know Still was on there too.
Oh, Still was 19. I completely forgot I had Devin Still. So Still had that amazing, again, 2012 season where he just was an ultimate leader. So I absolutely. So those are my measuring sticks at D tackle.
Yep. Do you want to talk about your number one, or is that revealing too much?
Oh no, the whole list. We've had it out. We hope you
Yep.
you go in and give it a read and read some of the reasons.
All right.
Um, so I'm just going to give the top five real quick here. Number 5 was Tyler Warren. Big reason for Warren there. Like you look at how bad the wide receivers were, and it really became evident the whole passing game was through Tyler's hands. And did he ever let us down in any way, shape, or form? I don't think he did. You can make the argument, Joe. Tyler Warren's 2024 season was the best offensive season of the 21st century by a Penn State player. And you got to consider that's Larry Johnson with 2,000 yards.
That would be my number one, probably.
Saquon Barkley, who had Big Ten MVP seasons in 2016 and 17. Allen Robinson, who put up some really big numbers in the O'Brien era. So that's about as high as a compliment as I could give a player. Micah Parsons is number 4. To me, Micah Parsons should have been number 1. But the problem is we never got to see him make the transition that Abdul did. And I think the whole Parsons situation fueled Carter's situation. And we'll talk about that in a second. Number 3 is Paul Posluszny. When you think of the Chicago Bears, you always get this image of Dick Butkus. He has his hands taped. They're all chapped. They're blooded. And you sit there, and that's the very first thing you think of when you think of the Chicago Bears and you think of the monsters of the Midway. When you think of Penn State and linebacker U, how don't you think of Paul Posluszny with the eye black, the busted nose? You think of him with the goal line stand against Minnesota, just diving and destroying the Minnesota tailback, and just being the tackling machine that he was. And, as a pure linebacker, much like I said there, if Jack Ham said that he was the best he saw, that's about as high as a compliment you can get at Penn State. Number 2 was Saquon Barkley. I don't know if there's enough superlatives in the English language to really adequately describe Saquon Barkley. It's just he was such a marvel. And to me, the one thing that was missing from his career, and granted, he got Penn State a Big Ten championship. It's the lone one of the Franklin era. And he was, pretty much the everything went through him for Penn State's runs to the Rose Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl. The thing is with him was, there. I don't know if it was Joe Moorhead's offense. You look at the Ohio State game in 2017, and it's just after that kickoff return, they just took him out of the game. And it's like, I remember that. And it's not, I used that game against him, but it was always like when Saquon was flirting with immortality. And again, he has, purpose yards record and all the above. I just look at that and I go, you were right there. I don't know. But number one for me was Abdul Carter. And what amazes me with Abdul Carter was graded, I believe, by Pro Football Focus College, a 90 grade at the linebacker position, and many felt should have been an All American in 2023. He moved to a completely different position as an edge rusher, and we saw Abdul struggle as he made that transition, Joe. But after he figured it out, 12 sacks, 24 tackles for losses. That number, the only number in Penn State history that is more is Courtney Brown's 30 in the 99 season. And then you look at the 66 pressures. He was already entering the season, I believe, number 2 or number 3 amongst power 4 linebackers and defenders, I believe, overall with pressures. He led the nation with 66. And like, that is so unique. And to me, I think that the reason I felt Penn State was able to do the run that they did and whatnot, a lot of it had to do, Tyler Warren on the offensive side of the ball. But in my opinion, the attention that Abdul Carter commanded warranted a lot of attention, opened up opportunities for like Denai Sutton, Zane Durant. They were able to have a lot of rovers in the back seven. So he was my number one.
Fantastic. You can check out Kyle's series. It's titled The Top 25 Penn State Players of the Millennium, and it's going to be part 1, part 2. We use numerals, so I, triple I, what have you. If you've seen the Rocky movies, you'll get it.
1 through 5. And unlike the Rocky movies, the 5th one in this one's the best.
All right. Well, we're through segment double I of this episode of Joe and the Fat Man. When we come back, it's going to be our box of mystery, and Fat Man's going to lead the way there when we come back.